Hello, everyone, and welcome to Global Engagement Network's Gen Monthly. This month, we're doing it on civil rights. What do civil rights look like in the 21st century? I'm glad everyone came to show up. We have people watching live on YouTube, and we have people that registered that are in here on Zoom. And so we thank everyone for coming, and it's going to be a great conversation. To introduce our panelists, we have Roland Livingston with us. He's a managing partner at R.E. Livingston and Associates. We have J. Rap Brown, who is a poet, man, and revolutionary. Brandon X. Bell is owner, writer, and talent of Landmark Entertainment. And Anoa J. Changa is editor at Progressive Army, a contributor to The Benjamin Dixon Show, and her own The Way with Anoa. So welcome all, and thank you for coming. Let's introduce, have you guys introduce yourself. First, Roland, just briefly tell us about yourself.
Thanks, Sean. My name is Roland Livingston. I'm an organizational development consultant and educator. I teach organizational behavior, leadership, and strategy in doctoral programs online, primarily. I live in Everett, Washington, and I'm excited to be a part of this panel and looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you for coming, Roland. You're 20 minutes down the road from me, apparently, and I had no idea. So, J. Rap Brown, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm a spoken word artist, carpenter by trade, served in the military. I've served in war zones as a civilian contractor, father, student. I wear many hats. I'm from Toledo, Ohio. That's about it.
Awesome.
Thank you for your service.
No problem.
Awesome. Thank you for coming. Brandon X. Bell, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm a CEO of my own film and entertainment company called Landmark Entertainment in conjunction with Bro-Op Films. I'm also a media consultant for G1 NBC, creating media content from films, short films to movies. Also a music producer, writer, screenwriter, director, father, husband, AT&T consultant, man of many hats as well, and and also civil rights activist and philanthropist. Worked with several nonprofit organizations, taught theater to K through 12 for 3 years with Visions of Angels. So and that's pretty much it.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us.
Cleveland, Ohio.
Of course, yeah. Anoa J. Changa, how about you? Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll move into group questions.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Great to be in your company. I'm Anoa. As you mentioned, I host The Way with Anoa weekly. I'm also a contributor at times to The Benjamin Dixon Show, and I'm editor-at-large of the Progressive Army, which is a progressive blog that has been around for approximately a year now. In my day life, I'm an attorney and all the time a proud mom of two. And then in my other life, which are my other jobs, I also do some political consulting. I'm engaged in some grassroots organizing and stuff. So most of it, a lot of it tends to be digital, but I like to facilitate interactions between good people doing good work. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for coming. All right. Well, let's jump right into the panel questions. And the first question, it's going to be 3 questions, and we'll give each panelist 5 to 7 minutes to go ahead and answer their questions however they feel they should or want to. The first question is, when you hear the term civil rights, what do you think about? The other questions are, do you feel the civil rights movement has made a difference or an impact on your society? If so, how? And finally, what are some conversations that we need to have right now that can impact how people view the term civil rights? Let's go ahead and hear from Roland first.
Okay, thanks, Sean. When I hear the term civil rights, it takes me back to the late 50s, early 60s time frame when I was in high school and in undergraduate school and actively engaged in civil rights struggle at that time, engaged in sit-ins and freedom rides, and did my time in the street, if you will, to try and help bring about change in our country. So that's what comes to mind when I hear it, when I hear the term today. And I'm aware of the fact that back then, a lot of what I felt was going on, and a lot of what I think a lot of other folks felt was going on, was individual to individual racism. But that's not all that was going on. There was also racism from institutions to individuals as well. And the racism from institutions distributed, I think, in many ways, deliberately destroyed and set back communities of color by herding people into ghettos and stripping them via poor education, predatory housing loans. I mean, these things were going on back then, and they continued on through the 70s and 80s, and to some extent even to today. We still are faced with punitive policing. I think the cumulative effects of these things didn't disappear as a result of the passage of the 1964-65 Civil Rights Act. They're still happening. And now, even though there isn't blatant person-to-person racism, I mean, we swept all of those effects under the rug. And I think we blame and continue to hear there's a term that's often used in the political arena, dog whistles, I think is the term. We hear that folks simply aren't working hard enough to achieve what they say they want to have for themselves. And when I say folks, I mean Black people, Latinos, Muslims, anyone who is marginalized in this society is generally blamed, if you will, for not working hard enough. And I think the effects of institutionalized racism are what we should be trying to fix now. That's, to me, what the civil rights movement needs to move toward. I think about the second question, the civil rights movement, has it made a difference or an impact on our society, and how? I do believe it has made an impact on our society. I know that things are not as bad today as they were in 1964-65 time frame when the civil rights legislation was passed. But that doesn't mean that we have gone as far as we need to go in terms of trying to figure out ways to enable people to come together and to really listen to each other and to care and hear the stories that we each have to tell the other. And to put that into a perspective that may help to explain what I'm thinking about, I am the son of a Black man who moved in the Great Migration from South Carolina in 1932-33 time frame. The Great Migration of Blacks from the South to places like Cleveland, Ohio. I heard someone mention Cleveland, but to New York and Philadelphia and even west to California. That migration took place over time, and it happened in a way that it was hardly even recognized as an event. It, in fact, was something that just emerged over time. But those folks who made that migration were my father and his generation, and perhaps even his uncles. I know his uncles before him, who would have been my granduncles, if you will, started the migration as far as my family was concerned. And so I wasn't born in the South. I didn't experience racism in the same way that my dad did when he was growing up. However, as the grandchild, me, of a former slave, I heard the stories. And what that made me think about, or makes me think about today, is that the stories that I heard about what I needed to do in order to be safe anytime that I traveled to the South was to figure out how to stay in my place, if you will. Stay in your place. I mean, and folks from my generation and certainly from my father's generation understood what that meant, to stay in your place. The slave owners and the children of slave owners and the grandchildren of slave owners heard the stories from the perspective of their families. So we've got these two strands, if you will, of storytelling where they remain with us today. And I think the stories that we grew up with about each other today still serve as a sounding board for how we experience each other in the world today. Now, that sounding board may be somewhat faint, but it's still there. And what I think is important in terms of conversations that we need to have right now that can impact how people might begin to think about civil rights differently and think about it in a way that is constructive, is we need to change the narrative so that majority and minority folks can see and hear each other differently than those dog whistles that are still resonating in the back of our minds. And I say that because I do believe and I do know that a lot of progress has been made. And I think that what we have to do with civil rights today is to figure out a way to build upon that progress. So that's where I am, and that's what I wanted to share just to get us started.
Thank you very much, Roland. I appreciate it. Some very good insight. Going to you, J. Rat Brown. What is it that you think about these questions? You know, where are you coming from?
Well, first off, like I speak from the Black perspective. You know, that's what I believe. That's what I know. When I think about civil rights, the term brings to mind images of dogs being sicked on peaceful protesters, police brutality, struggle. You know, I look back on that and it makes me feel obligated to kind of, you know, carry the torch. Civil rights to me, I don't know if it was really worth it, if it was really worth the effort. You know, we did make strides. You know, the civil rights movement was definitely gave us more rights, but I question, like, why do we have to fight for rights? You know, like, rights are God-given. They are, according to the Constitution, they unalienable, you know. So the fact that we even have to fight for them is troublesome to me. And the fact that in spite of all the struggle and the hardships that our ancestors endured, here we are in 2017, and it's looking a lot like the history books, you know, police brutality, and the general consensus is, you know, it's our fault. We need to work harder, like Roland was saying. What was the second question?
Well, it actually leads right into what you were saying. So do you feel like it had any impact then? I mean, if you feel like maybe it wasn't worth it, then you must feel like maybe it didn't have as much impact as, you know, the juice wasn't worth the squeeze, so to say.
Right. I think that it has had some, it's definitely had an impact. It's had a large impact. Some positive and some not so much. I think out of the civil rights and the fight for integration that we as a people, we being Black people, have kind of decided to assimilate as opposed to building our own. You know, prior to integration, like, it was way more Black owned, but like it had to be. We had no other alternative. So if you compare Black communities pre-integration as compared to post-integration, like, we declined in every positive aspect. You know, it's fewer Black-owned businesses. It's more babies out of wedlock. Like, I don't want to say we lost, but it's our sense of self-sufficiency has been greatly declined. I think that the effort that we put into civil rights and being equal, we should have put into our own communities and building our own nation kind of within the nation, kind of like every other racial group has. Like it's Chinatowns everywhere. You go to Mexican parts of town and they have their own everything. It's a fully functioning community. Whereas if you go to the black community, is very little black owned businesses. We maybe got a couple barbershops or whatnot, but all of the businesses are owned by people that take that money outside of our community back to their own communities. I think that is a direct result of the civil rights movement and integration. And that's not to take anything from the people who fought for civil rights. That I think that they did what they thought was the best thing to do at the time, but hindsight is 2020. And as far as what we can do now, I think we need reparations. I think it's old, and I think it's ridiculous. I think it's ridiculous that that we haven't gotten reparations when you consider that the Japanese got reparations for the internment camps during World War II, and even the slave owners were paid reparations after losing the slaves as property. So to say that it's old and to move on, I think that's kind of callous, and it goes. It speaks to the mind of America, so to speak. It's kind of a get over it type of attitude, but the traumas and the problems, went untreated. You know what I'm saying? So I think that that reparations will be the starting point as far as progress from here on out.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Yeah, no, I feel what you're saying when it comes to, there is a segment of this country that's like, hey, Obama was president, we're all good
Right.
now, and it's like, but while they're clearly demonstrating these, what they see as differences, and that, and they're embracing this society that's trying to push back. So, no, great stuff. Thank you very much, Jay. All right, finally, Anoa, we're going to Brandon next. Brandon X Bell, why don't you dive in? What do you think about these questions?
I think as a human being, I find it just absolutely absurd that we actually have to have questions like this in the first place.
Yeah.
Right. For real though, like civil rights. When I think of civil rights, I think of, that's a fancy way of saying, hey, we as a country, or the United States, basically treated a group of people like dirt for hundreds of years. And then call it, hey, civil rights. No, these are rights that we should have had in the first place. Like Rap was saying, these civil, quote unquote, civil rights. Would they exist if it wasn't for slavery? Would it exist if it weren't for racism? They would just be called rights. They'll just be called rights. And I think, as a kid, my grandfather was the grandson of a slave. His grandfather was a slave, pre-Civil War, post-Civil War. And the stories that I heard, and growing up in Alabama and seeing the plantation where, my family came from, hearing the different things that took place even after, quote unquote, the Civil War was over and we were so-called free. We still weren't quote unquote free. It went for, the Civil War ended, 1896 per se, somewhere around that time period. 1896 to 1963, that's less than 100 years, and we were still getting beat, still getting hung from trees. We did try to make our own as communities, but the government and other racist communities destroyed those entities that we set up. So we tried it. We definitely tried it. But, Tulsa, Oklahoma, if anybody remembers Black Wall Street, that wasn't the only place that took place of. And then you also got to think what J Rap said about reparations, you know, and this also links to what my grandfather used to tell me. Those police officers that used to sick the dogs on the protesters that were in their 20s became the chief of police in the 80s. Those same guys were running the police stations in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, right? So those same dudes that didn't have a problem with sicking dogs on black people that were peacefully protesting were now in charge of arresting people. You know what I'm saying? And delivering commands and delivering orders to police officers that's under them that, you know, I don't know if they carry the same mentality, but, you know, I guarantee you that all of the fathers that had fake drugs planted on them back in the 80s, those kids suffered. I guarantee you those families that got, you know, separated back in the early 1900s, post-Civil War, that were still getting hung from trees when dad didn't come home. My grandfather don't know what happened to his dad. His dad could have been one of those black men hung from trees that didn't have any records, nothing like that, right? So where's that justice? Somebody killed thousands of black people and never went to jail for it, right? Those were families that were affected by, and it kind of makes me upset when I hear people say, oh, you know, slavery doesn't have an effect on what happens today. It totally has an effect on what happens today, generation by generation. I talked to a Jewish friend of mine. His grandfather was an immigrant. And I asked him, do you think that you benefited directly from slavery and Civil War? He was like, no. I was like, why do you think that? He was like, because my grandfather started his own business and built our, you know, family wealth up like that. I was like, okay, cool. When did he come over? In like the 1940s, 30s? He was like, yeah. And I was like, guess what? My grandfather wasn't able to start his own business back then, especially in certain regions. If you were a black man in Alabama, in Montgomery, Alabama, Raymer, Alabama, where my family is from, you weren't able to start your own business. You had to go join the military in order to try to make something. And you barely made it in. My grandfather didn't make it into the military the first time he tried to get in. And when he didn't, he got beat with a bull by his grandfather for leaving a sharecropping farm at the age of 15. Because life down there for a black man, for success, was about this much. So that black man, for the black man that didn't make it down from down there, they had kids. I know, because my family is still down in those communities, and you could see that the progress that was made was minimal from the civil rights era. Now, the civil rights era was very important because it stopped us from getting slaughtered. It helped us get jobs that we were already supposed to have, or at least have the opportunity to get. It allowed us to get the little bit of education that the white man felt that, okay, we could have, but we also have to get scholarships and grants and this, that, and the third. So when you break all that down, and then on top of that, you have from the Tuskegee experiments to the FBI knowingly putting narcotics in African-American communities, knowingly willing to destroy them, falsely in prison. You add all that up, and now we have a domino effect, right? And I think, afraid, we might be too late for reparations because we have governments now that don't want to take the blame. We have segments of people that don't want to take the blame, and now racism is not nationwide anymore. It's individualized, and it's also regionalized, meaning that it's very liberal if you go to Seattle. And if you're a black man, you might have an opportunity to get a job there. But if you go to Montgomery, Alabama, your opportunities as a black man is limited. You go to Florida, your opportunities as a black man is limited to the basketball court or music, or you better be the greatest straight A student ever to be able to get into a good college, because your parents can't afford it, because because most African American communities are still products of slavery, post-Civil War, pre-Civil Rights Movement, during the Civil Rights Movement, and after that. And you add all that up, because nothing really positive came out of any of those movements for black people. We lost our leaders in the process of the Civil Rights Movement. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, the list goes on. Those are the two most famous, right? Okay, then you go to the 80s and 70s when they're purposely putting narcotics in the communities after they destroyed the Black Panther Party and the civil rights, whatever leaders that we had. So therefore, let's move to the 90s. Oh, we got TV shows or BET and everything is good, but we still had to fight for equal pay. We still had the affirmative action had to be placed in place because we still had bigotry in the hiring sector of jobs. And that stems still from slavery, from post-Civil War to the 1900s to the 1920s. So everybody really with civil rights wanted, that basically means let's sweep all of the bad things that we did to Black people under the rug. And now they're pointing the fingers at other communities, what they did wrong and what they're doing wrong. So they never have to deal with what happened there.
So what's the next step then?
We have to have solutions.
Mm-hmm.
We already know what the problems are. Please, I mean, who doesn't know what the problems are? If you're a Black person or a Caucasian person or a Mexican person that don't understand how this country was mostly built on corruption, maybe we all need to admit that, how this country shed blood of innocent lives, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of families. And now we are at a point where, I mean, pretty much, I mean, either we have solutions or we're going to go backwards. And that's where we're at. Either we're going to put in solutions now or we're going to go backwards, because you have a large segment of white people that are feeling, hey, I'm being discriminated against now. And you still got Black people like, hey, what about us? You got Mexicans like, hey, we're being discriminated against now. Then you got, now it's just, now everybody has got a problem with everybody. And we have to find solutions now before this whole divide and conquer thing really takes place. Because in my opinion, the only people now that has the power to start reversing the tide is our government and the ones who are in control of economics.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Brandon. That was very, great content there, man. Great stuff. All right. Well, lastly, we're going to go to Anoa for your insights on this. What are you thinking?
So much has been said and very well said, everybody ahead of me. Definitely, reiterate several points. Thinking about civil rights, I think of something that was a phased in process of very limited acclamation of some level of rights and access being given to initially a group of people that were never ever considered as a part of this country from its inception. An attempt to, kind of fit us into the fabric of American society, in which we were never meant to be more than property, right? United States is built on a system of racialized inequity, and our system of capitalism is fundamentally built on Blackness as something that is to be owned and commodified. And we see that so much now through our media, through music, through so many different aspects. Even I just saw Get Out tonight, and anyway, that's a whole other story. But in terms of civil rights, I mean, the civil rights movement and the focus on being able to do things in a very limited fashion. And when you think about the civil rights movement, so much of it was focused on the South. There's very little discussion, even when we talk about racism and Jim Crow, right? Even when we're taught it, now in more modern times, we're so focused on the South, and there's a dichotomy as if the North is good and the South is evil. That's even how we learn about the Civil War. The North is good and the South is evil. But the problem is that it does not actually address, the underlying issues and subjugation of people of color, Black people in this country, outside of, Southern areas. When we look at the rise of the Black Power movement, you look at some of the stuff from Malcolm X and other people, during that what we call the civil rights era. I mean, that's really more like the second wave of the civil rights movement. I think someone alluded to it earlier. You had maybe more your first wave post Reconstruction era. When you look at, your early 1900s with the start of the Niagara movement, which was J.R. Clifford and W. Du Bois, which was really the precursor to the NAACP, that was kind of, the first wave of civil rights. You really see that height. I mean, we tend to think of it as like these spurts of action that happened versus there was actually a continuous effort over, the whole time. But it's just civil rights to me is just something that is just basic that someone is trying to give you so that you feel good, like being able to eat at a lunch counter. I know that these are really just basic aspects of life. But I feel like focusing on civil rights has kept us not looking at the larger systemic issues in society. Like Malcolm X, during his time, he was focused on going to the UN and bringing, international human rights charges against the United States for subjugation of Black people, right? Like really the real issues we're facing aren't these basic level. And again, even when you look at separate but equal and stuff like that, like when we look at like the methods that we're taking to address issues, like, issues of Black schools not having the same schedule, like with Black students in the South not being able to have the same access to education, the solution was to get rid of Black schools and put Black students in white schools. But what that did was it created a problem where we no longer, if you have one school now, you don't need two principals. You don't need two sets of teachers for all these different things. So what happens to the Black teachers, principals, what happens to people who ran Black institutions when we're only focusing on, putting bandages on issues versus looking at real access and engagement. And that's why, like, I think civil rights and focusing on civil rights, it falls short, right? Because we're really talking about a full actual issues in terms of equality and access. When you're trying to fit people into society that never saw us as human beings to begin with, I mean, the only thing you can do is embrace, as we now see, we see a continuation of before, but we're really seeing a ramping up once again of focus on addressing systemic racism, other systemic issues and oppressions, and looking towards a real meaningful human rights platform here in the United States. Even when you look at, I think civil rights just doesn't, because even the language, civil rights, right? It's a civil remedy on issues that are actually inflicting a level of violence and in some ways very criminal on marginalized groups of people, right? So we're looking at civil, even when you look at like when you have police departments being investigated by DOJ, you look at the civil remedies that are put in place there. Like, okay, we're going to give you some rules and stuff that you need to follow better, but that doesn't necessarily translate into actually addressing any of the issues. One of the brothers mentioned before about how drugs are being flooded into communities. It does not really it is not necessarily having, like when you look at the Chicago Police Department, Philly, New York, all these different places that have had consent decrees are not necessarily lessening body counts, right? Consent decrees are not necessarily changing the fabric and the underlying racism that exists within the system that enables police officers to do so much of what happens in our communities, right? So having these limited focuses on just somehow trying to figure out a way to put a bandage of the system, I think really falls short of what we ultimately need to be doing. So when I think of civil rights, I think of something that's just kind of to pacify people so they can get along and be a part of the actual, society as it exists right now. When you look at Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and you look at his shift from, the integrationist platform of the late 50s, early 60s, so when he starts doing more of the poor people's campaign and he's attacking the heart of capitalism as it is practiced here in America and abroad, and American imperialism, when you really start looking at that type of focus and that type of lens, that is when you really start affecting the pockets and the position and the status of people, and they don't want that. Right. So yes, civil rights, and we can do sit-ins, and and again, this is not to say that work was not valuable, but I think that is only one aspect. And I think sometimes when we focus things on civil rights only and not look at this broader, bigger picture of issues, like what's happening in Flint, right? We're over 2 years now of Flint not having potable, good water, basically. Water is a basic human right. It's not a civil right. I mean, to say it's a civil rights issue, it really, it undercuts the whole. It's a human rights. We have people living in the supposedly greatest country on earth who do not have clean water, and Flint is just one example. That's the example we all talk about the most because of the egregious government conduct involved. There are like 3,000 other municipalities or something like that nationwide. I forget the exact number that have impacted water sources. Just dealing with lead, not all other types of chemicals and stuff. So I think about civil rights, I think about something that, like a terminology and a body of work that falls short of actualizing and making sure that human beings here in this country and abroad have what they need to not only just exist, but to be equal with everyone else around them.
All right. Well, moving forward, looking at what the impacts might have been from the civil rights movement, where do we go from here? What's the next step?
Well,
do you
I mean,
think?
we've been in a next step position now for 50 years. I mean, we've actually seen, resegregating. Well, I mean, honestly, I don't know that we really ever had true desegregation of public schools, and again, the focus was so much on the South. But when you look at places like Michigan, like New York and Milwaukee are two of the most, and well, New York, I think it's New York, Milwaukee, and Chicago were the three most segregated cities. I think it was the Urban Land Institute report, maybe. I could be getting that wrong too, but they are among the most segregated cities in America, and they're all northern cities. So we have seen, and we continue to see, until we actually start getting down into real meat and potatoes of how things have been not only created but maintained systemically. Like, yes, okay, we focused on civil rights in the 60s in the South, but didn't really address any of the persisting issues with racial segregation, economic segregation that existed up north. We are now feeling that now with widespread gentrification programs. We have struggles with education system. I mean, it's been 62 years, going on 63 years since Brown versus Board of Education, and we have a worsening situation now in terms of inequality in our school system. And there was a report done, reports that I can never remember who wrote it, but there's a research report done based in Chicago. The University of Chicago has a research department and that does a lot of stuff with education in the city of Chicago. And they looked at similarly situated neighborhoods based on race and economics. And if you found a similarly situated neighborhood, middle-class Black neighborhood, middle-class white neighborhood, the schools were so much more lower performing for various reasons. But when you look at the way resources and stuff are allocated to schools, for example, when it's based on property values and things like that, when we look at places like Chicago, like Detroit, that have a history of redlining and other practices that systematically devalued neighborhoods where Black people and Latino people live, you didn't then have this structure that's put in place where you're receiving less resources and goods for your community. So where do we go? I mean, we have to challenge the way these existing issues. Someone said it before about how the person who was the cop that was sicking a dog on you in the 60s ends up being a police chief in the 80s. It's the same type of thing we have with these systems that we have in place. These are the same exact systems. We might have these little, programs that we put in place here and there, but unless we're actually addressing the systemic issues within these systems that we have in place, and we continue to work at it, because it's not to say, hey, we achieved this thing, we won a court victory. I mean, enforcement and actually follow through is absolutely necessary. So we have to engage in our local communities on these issues, whether it's, dealing with blight being used as a process to clear out Black and brown neighborhoods, or just issues going on for our schools. We have to figure out what types of tools that we have and get involved on a grassroots level to start repairing some stuff, while we also work within various systems that exist around us.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much again for being here. Great answers for everyone from all of our panelists. Now we're going to take a Sorry about that, everyone. We're going to take a moment to figure out how we're going to break everyone up and to open it up to our guests. And so just hang on a moment while we do that, and we'll get right back to it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody. I just want to say also that that was awesome conversation to hear. Thank you so much.
Yeah, very much so. Well, actually, I'll go quick first just to open it up. So as I'm sitting here thinking about this, obviously it's hard. Someone mentioned Seattle and how we're hopefully more progressive, and we definitely are. And how maybe there's more opportunities there for minorities and Black people just in general. But my idea is so I took a trip down to Atlanta a few years ago, and we went to the Human and Civil Rights Museum down there. And it's got all sorts of things. It's a very moving experience. It's a great building, and there's even one part where you go and you sit at a lunch counter and you put the headphones on and you hear recordings. I don't remember if they were real life recordings. I think they were of some of the things that were being yelled at, and you hear things getting thrown at you. And so it was they're trying to invoke this experience, and just that alone brings some empathy out in me and my wife who were there. But obviously I can't tell if that's if it's because we were already open to the empathy, or if someone if you bring someone that really has these real ingrained racist tendencies or bigoted tendencies, does that even does that sort of thing even work on them? So I guess my question would be, is there even a way to enlighten people to the Black experience besides just these sorts of one-on-one conversations? Does that something like that actually help, or is it are some people just lost, I guess? When it comes to that's just a weird white guy's question, I guess.
Can I say something?
I don't have an answer to that question, but I have a thought about it, which is it's important, I believe, for folks to hear each other's stories. I think the Black tradition that back up, Roland. I think my experience and the experience of perhaps some other Black Americans of my generation, and perhaps also of the younger generation, because all you guys on here are younger than me. So I start by telling you my story. I want to know what the white guy's story is that helps me to understand how he sees me. What is his story? Because if I don't understand what his story is and where he's coming from, and if he is not willing to be candid with me about his story, then we can't begin to navigate the challenge of finding common ground. And I mean, I listen to the other panelists. I look at what's here in the chat, and I I think we're all on board with what's going on, what our perception is of what's going on. But what I am also conscious of is that we could be an echo chamber. So I don't know who else is out there listening to this and what their story may be. And I'm interested in that, because I think when we are able to hear each other's story, then maybe we can begin to find a way to move forward together. And I see that my good friend Brandon is trying to get his hand in there.
Yeah, because I love what you said about the experience, and I was blessed to grow up, and my mother had me in all different kinds of schools. Like, honestly, I moved around a lot. I went to a school where I was the only Black kid and all the kids were white. I went to schools where I was the only kid from a farm and all the kids were Black. And then I went to multicultural schools with kids that had a lot of money, and got to hang out with them, became friends with a lot of people from different walks of life, and got to see exactly how, really a little inside look at that works. And honestly, from my experience, is really based upon, stereotypes and misconceptions and misunderstandings, really. I remember when I was like 6 and I spent the night over at my friend Donnie's house, white kid. We played, and we were friends. We were good friends. Stayed in the trailer park, and his father was racist as hell. And I remember him saying, he was arguing with his wife, and he just said, "Get that little monkey out of my house." You called me a little. That was at the age of 6. And you know, it's kind of like, oh, okay, all right. So I guess I know what's up. You know, and at 6, it kind of sobered me up. At 6, I sobered up really well to a lot of things, to how life was. And for, you know, for everybody, if you want to have a Black experience, I mean, I think that's quite impossible for really people to have. It's not a Black experience. It's really, you know, it's or a white experience. Really, just experience of what you went through in your life. Because you got some Black people who's never experienced racism before, and they really don't understand it, just like a white person who never experienced racism before. But you also have white people who are racist because they have misconceptions about the African American community. Yeah. You have Black people that think that all white people are racist. And I think, you know, it's kind of funny that, you know, our government hinges on, thank God there's not racist. Some of those white people aren't racist, because if a lot of white people were racist, like how it was like a long time ago, it'll still be messed up out here. So thank goodness, you know, we had brave African Americans who fought the good fight, and then we also had brave white people who went against everything that they were taught about Black people and how they should perceive the country. Because if it wasn't, you know, it had to take a little bit of both. It had to take white people understanding that, man, it started off as a minority, then it grew to, you know, I don't know however large a number that was, but there was enough white people who said, like, yeah, man, that's wrong. But if every white person said no, if every white person kept the same iota of Black people are bad and we treat them like garbage, then we wouldn't made the progress. So to have the experience, I think that everybody has their own experience. It just has to be you as an individual that says, hey, what is taking place here is wrong. You know, what's taking place here is right. Because you got some Black people who were slave catchers, then you had some Black people who were, you know, just as I would say, played a bigger part. So it's really on the individual to really kind of have the experience of, I want to do the right thing. And we have to have more people now about doing the right thing, and not thinking about, okay, these people are from here or that person is this color. Because we've went through that. There are still racist white people. I mean, that's just what it is. Racism still exists. If anybody that doesn't think racism still exists, you're naive. Racism still exists. But there are also solutions that exist too. So now we have to get to the solutions. And I think that a lot of energy has to be focused on getting to the solutions, because we know what the problems are. I mean, if you don't, then, I mean, you have to be in a minority or you're just being ignorant.
Yeah. And, you know, and that's hard because you want to think that politically you can get the backing and then that's going to help being able to change things. But they've already structured it so that it's so hard to gain power in the system.
It has to be about economics. If it's economically feasible, then yeah, if it's about economics, then they will make the right decision. As far as same thing, the Civil War wasn't fight to free African Americans. The Civil War was fought for economics. You know, during the Civil Rights era, I mean, really, was it about Black people being treated bad or economics? Because the Montgomery bus boycott affected the economics of the buses. You know, hell, you look at Hidden Figures. I mean, naivety kept America from getting to where we needed to get to until we had to, well, what's best for the country? To not be racist. Well, what's better for economics? Not be racist. If money never played a part in it, where would we be at, actually? So, you know, we have to take a look at it. What, like, you know, why are people, where are we making our moves at? What is it about, really? And that's where we find our solutions and our problems.
Awesome.
I wanted to say, I want to piggyback on what he just said about the economics. If it were not for economics, would it have been slavery? You know, and I think about Bacon's Rebellion, you know, where poor Blacks and poor whites got together on the strength of their common interest and fought an oppressive system. And after that, that's when they really start implementing racial prejudice, you know, and they uplifted those and white indentured servers to overseers, you know, and it brings me back to reparations, because I seen a video of from the news clip. They was doing a special on some news show in the 60s or 50s, and they was asking just regular working class white people if they felt like Black people were oppressed, and the overwhelming answer was no. even in spite of everything that was going on back then, most white people felt like black people were, you know, given a fair shake. And I think that's still the mindset on the most part. Now, I'm not so much concerned with, you know, trying to reform races or explain my struggle to people. I think that the struggle is apparent. You know, if you can't see it, I don't know what's wrong with you. But then again, I'm looking through my eyes. I'm looking, you know, from inside the struggle, looking out. I think I think black people need to be a little more selfish. You know, I think we need to focus on ourselves and do the work. You know, economics, like Brandon was saying, we need to. And the Montgomery bus boycott, like that's what kicked it all off, you know. So if we could boycott or own our own businesses, and I know it's easier said than done because we need to provide alternatives, but I think that's where our focus needs to be. It's like how much more can we explain? You know, it's white people out there willing to do the work and that recognize you know, the plight of some black people and some and others that don't. So I think we need to just focus on ourselves, figure out what we're gonna do, start doing it, and if some help comes along the way, then cool. But if not, but I'm not planning on no help. I feel like if like this whole, I mean, to be honest, like America is founded on racism and genocide and getting over on the next man. You know, nobody would be here if it wasn't for the genocide of the Native Americans. The entire American system is based on racial prejudice. America is what it is based on the enslavement of black people. America would be nothing without that. America would have never grown to the superpower that it is without slavery, you know. And once slavery ended, like they didn't know what to do with us. Like when this country was never envisioned with black people being free. You know, black people were supposed to always be a free labor force, and everything that's happened since slavery, quote unquote, ended has been, you know, kind of an effort to contain us. So like he was saying about Black Wall Street and other thriving black communities that were literally destroyed. Black Wall Street was the first time bombs were dropped on American soil. And it was dropped on American soil by Americans on other Americans, you know, and it's rarely even talked about. You can learn more about Black Wall Street on Facebook than you can in the history books. And it's an uncomfortable conversation to have, but it's a conversation that needs to be had and acknowledged. So when people say we not working hard enough, like we've done the work, you know, we built several thriving cities that were totally wiped out. And we need to be able to get back to that. I feel like if they could do it in 1922, there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to do it now. But they did it in 1922, not looking for help. They just did it on their own. And that has to be our mindset. There's no help coming. It's just us, you know. If that's our mindset and we understand that, like it's a sink or swim situation, our backs are to the wall and we have to do what we have to do. We can't just keep going to these people who clearly don't give a damn. You know, these people then hung is and like the man, like the prison industrial complex or the fact like it's so many different layers to that, you know. But bottom line is like it's no help coming. It's no help coming. Like we need to understand that and act accordingly.
Definitely, yeah. Well, I think more people are seeing that than ever. And unfortunately, maybe what it took is one panelist, I'm not sure which one it was, but was mentioning that, you know, now that they're the one, like now that their stuff, like their freedoms, their what they expect, the things that they're taking for granted, now that those are being infringed upon, or at least are being threatened to be infringed upon, all of a sudden they're up at arms. And so there's been a question as to, you know, is it, well, not only is it too little too late as far as that mass movement goes, as far as, you know, like the Women's March and that sort of thing, but can we actually bring all these groups together, knowing that there's no help that's going to come, and it's just about us coming together and you know, taking what is ours and what we believe, you know, certain people in our, you know, society have coming to them, because that actually sounds like, you're asking for violence, but albeit maybe that's what it'll end up taking. Usually governments see that that's inevitable and try and shut people up with reparations or whatever they think it is that is going to do that. And that takes a lot of, a lot of pain, a lot of push by, people that they're going to try and infringe their power upon. So I just
wanted to add just what you said, it might have been a rhetorical question, but there was can all these different movements and things come together? I mean, absolutely, there is room for collaborative work and development, but I do think that a lot of times when you think of a lot of these social movements or progressive stuff, there's a tendency for some people to think that you have to give up on some of your own initiatives or issues that you're working on for the sake of collaboration. And I think that we have to get out of trying to make ourselves feel comfortable by asking of silence of others. I mean, when you just think, again, going back to my example of environmental racism is something that is experienced disproportionately by Black and Brown communities all across the country. But these are not issues that are only inflicted. We're, again, going back to the issue of, clean water. I mean, there are high rates of asthma due to pollutants in the air and other contaminants in some areas. I mean, this is not necessarily just something solely that's felt by Black and Brown communities. Is something that you see happening in rural, predominantly white communities as well. So there is an opportunity when people can understand and look at things from a humanist perspective that you can have crossover. You can have just living. I spent 7 years living in West Virginia, and living in Appalachia was, after growing up in Chicago and New York, was fascinating, right? But there's so many commonalities. I go, this is really interesting. There's so much that is more similar than dissimilar in some aspects. And I mean, there's really organizing that can happen from the hood to the holler that we don't really think about and conceptualize that way, because we do have different things. And someone said it earlier about how the structure and the system is set up to keep us all separate and warring, because that's how, the party elites, the political elites, economic elites are able to keep their and maintain their control. If we're not talking to each other on similar levels about similar issues affecting us, and we allow things to divide us. Now, not to say that we can't address issues with racism. For me personally, prime example was one of my closest friends in West Virginia. Our kids were both youngish mothers. Our kids were the same exact age. They all played. We had two different issues. One, the boys were fighting some years ago. Our sons were fighting about Obama. All of a sudden, we hear this argument going on, right? And the kids they have been playing quietly. They burst in the room. And this is when I first found out that my dear friend was a Republican. I did not know that she was not only a Republican, but that she was one of those staunch conspiracy theorists hating Obama Republicans. It was the craziest experience ever, because the boys rush in and her son says something about him. And Max was like, I told him that wasn't true. And she says, well, and I just looked at her, I cocked my head, I said, what do you mean? Well, so then as adults, we had to figure out, can we work through this political difference? And what I really tried to explain to her was a racial difference. She didn't think there was anything wrong with what she was saying racially, because she's friends with Black people, right? And my Black kids spend time at her house. And I would have this experience so much living in West Virginia, right? Another example was with my son's football coach. They loved Max. The kids were always at their house, and I told him, I was like, please don't tell people you're not racist because we hang out with you. That's kind of racist in and of itself. But they didn't get that, because West Virginia is 2% Black, right? And so they don't have that same understanding of things, because that is not their experience. But when today, it's 5 years since Trayvon Martin was murdered by George Zimmerman, right? And when the case was happening, two of the coaches were like, oh, come on, Anoa, I saw the video, that was self-defense. And I was appalled. I'm sitting there looking at the two of them. And my son has always been big for his age. And I finally got through them by saying, look at Max. Look at Max and think in a few years, if Max is as big as he is now and he continues to be bigger, think about someone approaching Max. As much as you love my son, think about that. Just think about it for a moment. And they sat there and they're like, oh, I never considered. But it's just I don't know that we necessarily need to personalize things to get people to understand how they're being racist, but I do think that there needs to be some level of education and conversation that happens, because we do have large sections of America that are very, very white. that are very white and very untouched from anyone outside. They're insular and colloquial, and they hear these things and they get their sound bites from Fox News, and that is how their perception of us is colored and informed. And then these are people who then elect the majority of folks who are sitting in Congress right now. And then these are the people who are making laws that tell us. So somehow, some way, there has to be some level of engagement or organizing. But we also need other white people to talk to other white people, right? Like, I, as a Black woman, I can talk about Black experience and racism and stuff all I want to, and some people will listen, some people won't. Some people will tell me I'm angry or I'm not being realistic or I'm being whatever. But from another white person, that same message may actually resonate. So like the group Surge, I've observed different people engaging in certain work. And so other white people who are woke or in the know, they also have to step up and do, they have to do the work too. It can't just be us. It's not just our burden to bear.
So,
Exactly.
I agree with everything you just said, Anoa, and what that reminds me of is that
Briefly, Roland, before we go into breakouts.
What?
Just say what you're going to say, but just try and be brief so we can go to breakouts soon.
Oh, okay.
No worries, though.
Well,
Sorry to interrupt.
The long and short of it is, I think a lot of white people walk around with an image of Blacks in their skull, no matter where it comes from, that needs to be challenged, because that's why they treat Black people the way they do. And not just Black people. Someone said earlier that there are other minorities as well who are treated similarly based upon those images that are in people's minds. We've got to get down to face-to-face conversation and dialogue so that folks can hear each other's stories, as I said earlier.
Sure.
And by the way, the term racist, I think, throws up a wall every time I hear it. There is racism, but a person can be engaged in racism and not be a racist at the same time. I think that's a conversation that we need to have as well.
Interesting. All right. Well, thank you, Roland, and thank you, everyone on the panel. Now we'll take a brief moment to do a quick breakouts of our everyone that's here in Zoom with us.
Yep. And so while Aniko's creating those rooms, we're going to have panelists and our audience members and people from the Global Engagement Network in the same room. And we're going to explore a couple questions. What are some things that you can identify with from what you heard? What are some examples of bias that you may have experienced? What are some types of institutional bias do we need to be aware of in order to really make a difference? And what is or are the larger conversations that we still need to have regarding civil rights in the 21st century? So we kind of kicked that off, and so let's use this next, I would say, 15 minutes or so to have a conversation with each other and really talk about actions that we can take or that we can encourage others to take as we're leaving tonight. So, Nico, are you all set? Cool.
Okay, right now I've got one room assigned, and then whoever is not in a breakout room now, bring into the second breakout room.
Got it.
So. Okay. Okay, is everyone in their breakout rooms now?
They should be.
I
have me, you, Judy, Anoa, and Brandon in here, and then everybody else is in theirs?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So our questions, did you guys hear those questions at all? Or do you,
hey,
I can read them?
John?
Yeah.
I'm really sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, hey, Jeremy.
I'm not sure if everybody's in their breakout groups or not. Because I don't know if I'm supposed to be in your room, is my point. And on my screen right now, I'm seeing Andrew, I'm seeing Jerry, Brandon, John,
Okay.
Judy. I'm still seeing a lot of people.
Yeah, there should be two groups of like 6 people, Aniko.
Okay. Right now on my screen, I see unassigned, and then it says assigned to, and I'll assign them to the second breakout room again, individually.
Okay. bear with
Just
us
gonna
for
take
a
me
moment
one more
online,
minute here,
everybody,
guys.
as Aniko's getting our
It's
breakout
no
group
problem,
set up.
Aniko. Take your time. Seriously, you're doing
Michael and
awesome.
Cindy, thanks for watching.
Thank you. This is the first time I'm doing this, everyone, so just bear with me. We're almost there.
Thank you, Aniko.
And yeah, you should be getting a button to join a breakout room.
Okay, now everyone should be assigned. There are no unassigned on my screen, so everybody should be in there.
Hello.
All right, now we're in here. Hey, Anoa.
How you guys doing?
Good. Hey, Andrew. Hey, Jerry.
Hello.
How are you guys tonight?
Doing good.
All right, cool. So let's get in. Do you guys see the questions on my screen?
I see him here.
Okay. So let's just dive in. What are some things that you can identify with from what you heard? What are some examples of bias that you made? I'll just go ahead and answer them, and then you guys can go. Hey, Brandon.
Hey,
How's it going, man?
can y'all hear me?
Yep.
All right, am I here?
You're here.
All right.
All right. So I'm a couple things that I identified with from what I heard. I really love the economy discussion and the discussion about collaboration. I do think that is kind of where it's going. I do like the Global Engagement Network and G1NBC is taking a cooperative aspect and really exploring that as a business structure, and opening and learning more about the cooperative business structure and figuring out ways to make that work. I think that is going to be very impactful in terms of having organization and structure in place in order to help make that happen. I just, as far as how I identified with it, like I said, I just took everything from everyone's stories and was moved by all of it and hurt by a lot of it. But I'm inspired at the conversation and knowing that there are people that will help us take this forward and make it happen. I've experienced bias, just simple bias, being overweight. Sometimes you get that. It's not anything on the level of what we're talking about, but that's some that I might have experienced. Institutional bias that we need to be more aware of. I don't really know that I think we all, kind of like Roland said, it could turn into an echo chamber. I think we all kind of know what is going on with our institutions, and that I liked what I think it was what Anoa said is that our voice from the white person calling out racist behavior, even if it's someone who's not a racist, but if they do or say something that even could be remotely considered that, then I think it's important to have that discussion. And being a white person, that's a takeaway, is that I will be more I'm usually adamant when I hear stuff like that and calling people out, but I just hearing that my words might go a little bit farther just because it empowers me to be comfortable in taking a larger stand that I have. As far as the larger conversations that we need to have, I think we need to keep having conversations like this and just opening up the floor and having people share and learn from each other. And I do think that what we're doing with cooperative and collaborative media can really help bridge that gap.
Yep.
Andrew or Jerry, do you guys want to go?
Well, I agree about the media thing. I think something changed with the night of the election, actually, regardless of who you like. I think there was something that changed in the media, has switched to alternative YouTube type of things. But the kind of answering all four of those questions, a quick story about history. In the 1860s, right during the Civil War, the bankers in England and the United States were exchanging a series of letters, and I can't even find them on the internet anymore, that trying to figure out how to keep the slaves fed and for them to house themselves without them realizing that they were slaves. It's almost the exact quote from the letters. They were, and they designed what they called bonds back then, the treasury bond system. And that took about 50 years to get installed in 1913. So essentially a monetary slavery mechanism was installed in 1913. And that's the problem that I think needs to be solved. And I think that I have a solution that can wind out those accounting issues at the Federal Reserve System. I worked on Wall Street for several years. I've traded Series 7 degree in accounting, and I've studied this issue for 20, 30 years. I used to counterfeit money when I was a kid.
Like,
so,
casually throw that out there.
That's my perspective.
Okay, that's cool.
That's
So
awesome perspective.
what is the solution, or at least the
I
snippet?
respect that. And I think, you know, for the country or the government, and there's people in this country that rather spend $50 billion to build a wall rather than spend $50 billion to invest into the African American community, knowing the amount of injustice we have suffered is quite painful to know as a Black man in this country, that there are people that rather spend money on the wall than spend money to rectify what we all know was injustice. Now there's some people that still feel like, and this is my question to like the national of white America, because I think if you take a vote for Black people, you know, I would say about 98% of us would vote for, you know, we deserve some type of financial repair, because I mean, listen, I'm not the smartest, you know, tool in the drawer, but I do know if you have melanin in your skin and you're in this country of the United States and your last name is like Bell or Jackson or Johnson or Washington, you are more than likely a product of slavery. And you are more than likely an ancestor of someone who was raped, murdered, or beaten, and worked for free labor that benefited financially to some family that possibly is still benefiting today, or it benefited at one point in time. Because here's my thing, and the way I look at it, the country as a whole, you know, there were the difference between poor whites and poor Blacks is the fact that at one point in time, if you're poor white and you had an opportunity at changing that lifestyle, you had the opportunity. But with Black people, you didn't. Like, there's a lot of Black people that went their whole life without that opportunity. And so for one reason or the other. So I think now we're at the point of economically, you know, we basically built the country. Economically, you know, if we speak
person. Then I had the same experience 2 weeks ago, and I said, hold on, what's the problem? Why are you not wanting to take the dog? The Uber driver says, well, because there was a guy that got in my car with a seeing eye dog last time, and he totally went all over my seat, was absolutely terrible, and it just has created this bad experience. It put me in control, bringing me back to my point, of the messaging and of how I could talk to him about it. And I think you're absolutely right. If you want to change the way that people are perceived in this country, whether we're talking Black, Mexican, whatever the race or minority may be, and I think that this really could apply to more than just Black America, though I was really intrigued, Roland, by your comment that there's the slave piece of this, which makes it a little
for Black people or businesses for Black people. it's a tax that they're trying to put on that a lot of people wouldn't have a problem with paying for. But those same people will have a problem with paying. What if Donald Trump was like, hey, we're going to have a tax. It's going to be a $50 billion tax, and it's going to directly impact the African-American community and help them out. How many people would be, how many of his supporters would be like, yeah? Not too many. But hey, let's build a wall to keep Mexicans out. Right on. That's where we're at. So, you know, I don't hear Democrats screaming reparations or anything like that either. And that's kind of weird. So it's like, I mean, do we feel that black people were wrong?
Is there a reparations type movement? Are there I don't know.
Yes, there
Yeah.
are.
And
There is, in Cobra is one. There are several organizations.
Yeah, there are.
Okay.
But they don't get enough.
And John Conyers has introduced every year for I don't know how many years. He just re-updated legislation. He has a house, I forget what his House bill, I can't remember what it is, every year for a reparations committee to actually study the extent of, you know, the issue, to really be able to make a real report and come up with some suggestions on what reparations will look like.
No, that's cool. So what I think I'd like to do as part of this cooperative is to set up another panel discussion and do it highlighted just that issue, highlighting those organizations and people that are working on just that issue.
Who pays on the reparations is the issue.
What's that?
Who pays? Everybody. The same way, I mean,
who pays for the Iraq War, right?
like, I mean, really though, you know, I mean, for real, like, are we really, like, here's the thing, why is that a problem? It's not about who pays. Like, what you mean who pays? Like, you know, the same way we got a tax to build bridges, the same way that would be a tax to do that. But you know what I'm saying? It's the same thing. Like, what you mean who pays? We all pay. The same way everybody, the same way people benefited, the same way, I mean, we can all pay. I wouldn't have a problem with, you know, $100 out of my check going towards African-American reparations or some way, form, or fashion to, you know, build an African-American community. I won't have a problem with that at all.
I'll tell you what, the plan that I have in mind for building infrastructure is essentially a bond swap program. It takes the bonds, which are about 20 trillion right now, and swaps them for something else. Those bonds are owned by people. And what they're swapped for is going to be largely up to the particular owners, which gets into the reparations, and it also creates demand for treasury bonds. It also works from a legal perspective. I don't know if but you're bringing up reparations. I think that I have a solution for it without taxation.
I'm not saying taxation. If you have a solution without it, cool.
Right.
I mean, you know,
we didn't get taxed for Iraq. I don't know where that money comes from, but they found money to pay for it. Like, it's like I think I mean, I understand the concern about how do we pay for it and where do we pay for it. I get those concerns, but the United States government, as was mentioned earlier, has earmarked money from various different sources to handle certain things, right? I'm not even going to pretend to be an economist, so I'm not even going to go there. But there is a way to do stuff. There is a way to do that. My thing is, which is why I would really, and I can't think of the person. I mean, there have been lay people who have done studies. Like I said, John Conyers wants an actual government study done. The state of Illinois actually commissioned. They actually had a reparations commission. Well, they had a commission on the effects of the transatlantic slave trade several years ago. And they looked at different things like how did legal issues affect Black people in Illinois, just all different types of stuff. And they were able to come up with recommendations, but it was never acted upon when the governors changed.
Hey, to follow,
even I think what you're talking about in terms of the bonds, that's actually really that's really interesting.
Yeah,
I
follow up on that. I don't know if you're familiar with the history of it. Essentially, a lot of those treasury bonds. The lawyers were insane that designed this thing. but essentially the bonds went to the birth certificates in order to price your future income and future labor. So when you were born, you were assigned a future income, and then it was taxed, and that's the income tax. Does that make sense? Your birth certificate they're insane, but this is what they assert, that your labor from birth pays the interest and principal on the bonds, the treasury bonds. That's how the system works. So for reparations to be entered in, well, who owns the bonds? It's the very people that are maintaining the slavery conditions. Or they could purchase other bonds and then do the bond swap. So it gets very individual, even through the financial system, from the extremely wealthy to the everyone else, really.
I like that. I'd definitely be interested in hearing more about it, because I think any way that we can do it without taxing would be
Yeah,
good. I also would be.
I'm not talking about
Yeah.
like we tax people. You know, like I mean, that's just like my education as far as how the government works. Is, you know, hey, you want something, it got to be a tax or something like that. So, you know, there's ways to. I mean, the Federal Reserve prints money. I mean, if they really wanted to, they could be like, you know what? Yep, they could write a fat check if they wanted to. But you know, they tell us all of these complicated, you know, processes that has to take place in order for things to happen, which I don't think is that complicated. I think, you know, like they print money when they want to, and they don't print money when they want to, and they tell us what the value of it is, and we all just accept it. I think as a country, you know, if we really want to move past, you know, and really have feeling, then as you know, as a country, we do need, you know, more white people to say, hey, what happened to black people is wrong, and they need to be repaid for that. Even their ancestors and their grandchildren. And I think, you know, as black people, you know, we also should, you know, I mean, really, we have tried to, and we do, I would say I haven't, you know, met a white person I haven't been open to. I don't think, you know, all white people are racist. I don't think that, you know, racism belongs to one group of people. I think it belongs to the individuals. So, you know, I was fortunate enough to meet, you know, just good people, period. And I think that, you know, all good people, if you have common sense as a good person, you should know that, hey, what happened was wrong and it wasn't that long ago. And then all of the things that happen on top of that, just not slavery, but all of the hangings, the experiments, the narcotics, the judicial system, all of that. I mean, if you add all that up, I mean, you're really, like, this country really tried to destroy black people. I mean, if you really, like, how else would you look at it? They had a war on black people, an evil war, a war that, I mean, that black people didn't ask for, that we didn't even do anything to deserve. And for you know, if anybody like has any just common knowledge and sense, you know that the judicial system has mistreated black people and has ruined families and ruined lives. You know that the job market was never meant to incorporate black people. Is now they have to accommodate us because of the fact that the country's plan was never to have us a part of it. They're trying to reroute something that a large majority of them didn't want to reroute. Was with George Washington, the guy we have on our dollar bill that every black person has to look at, had slaves. And this is a guy that we honor. But, you know, I mean, to me, George Washington is just as good as Adolf Hitler. I mean, really, if you really want to break it down, let's think about it. Like, why? Because he founded the country, then he's supposed to be a good guy I'm supposed to honor? I mean, nah, like, dude killed people, innocent people, and raped people. I mean, he's on a dollar bill. So we have to look at, you know, like, okay, what was wrong? We know it's wrong, and let's just make it right. And there has to be enough people to say, okay, this is what took place was wrong, and let's make it right. So
And
who wants to take on responsibility?
Yep, and I do think Andrew is onto something though with really looking at our financial infrastructure and really looking at how it really is the 1% versus the 99%.
Yeah.
With our economy right now, it really is. And so finding ways to even have those conversations, continue those conversations, and make an impact, I do think that going that route is probably something that needs to happen sooner rather than later. And I know we're going to be closing our breakout groups and going back to the whole group. I wanted to see if Jerry wanted to chime in or if he had anything. I know we haven't heard from him yet. If not, that's okay. But I wanted to make sure that.
I'm actually pretty good. I mean, my points are basically what everyone else has already said. So I totally agree with Brandon that there needs to be some type of reparation. How we go about that is a different question, but I think there was a great injustice done to not just blacks, but to many classes of people that need to
You
probably
repay.
need
And
to be
it's not blacks. It's a lot
repaid
of
somewhat way.
yeah.
Cool. I'm not sure how much time we have. I think Sean's done, so we can. Yes, Nico, you hit close all rooms, and we will come back to the main room. So that'll give everyone a minute to come back. Hey, everyone out there, we're going back into the main room. Michael and Cindy, you guys
I
have had a
think
great
everyone should be in the
conversation.
main session now.
Yep, we'll give them not yet. How's it looking on your end, Nico? I only show 6 people in here.
30 seconds till the other one
Okay.
closes.
Gotcha.
It counts down, or it's counting down for me anyway.
That's funny. None of them hit the button. To leave, huh?
No, everybody was in a good conversation in both rooms. So
Yeah, I know it. Yeah, that's cool. For everyone out there watching, we are just coming back as a whole group, and you see everyone kind of pinging back into the room. And we're going to do a little bit of a debrief. I think without having given proper instructions in the beginning, I think what we'll do is let's talk about, and I think maybe hearing
Can I make
from
a suggestion?
yeah, sure.
Okay.
You're the facilitator in here.
All right.
And
Here's
Roland.
my suggestion. Just, I mean, keep it really simple. I don't know the conversation that they had over there. We had a really great conversation. So maybe just ask people to check out for tonight with what they're taking away from the conversation or reflections that they've had from the conversation. And just give each people like a minute to check out. Keep it short and simple, but give people a second to reflect on their conversation.
All right.
If they don't want to, they don't have to.
So can you restate that with authority as we close out the session? What you just said?
Sure. So we just had some really great discussions in our breakout groups, and I'm really excited to hear what each of you are going to bring back to this whole group. So in order to help you check out of tonight's call, and in order to help us share what we're taking away from other conversations that we've had, just close tonight with a reflection that you're having as you leave this evening. It can either be something that came out of your group discussion or something that you're thinking as you've listened to the conversation this evening. John, why don't you call down through the list and we can each check out in 45 seconds apiece.
Yeah, that sounds good. I'm just going to go with first on my list is Anoa, because she's the first in the room. So
Anoa, 45 seconds. What you got?
Thank you all for being so awesome. Having good conversations with good people is always a great thing. I'd love to hear more. I think it was Andrew who was talking. We were talking about furthering the conversation about reparations and raised the issue of how to fund it. How would we possibly fund something like that and raise possibility of something with treasury bonds, which I'd love to hear and learn more about. Like I said, again, economics is not my forte, but just really great, robust conversation. A lot of great insight from everyone. So awesome experience. Appreciate it.
great, thank you. Allison, you're next, and Jerry, you're on deck.
All right. Well, what I'm coming away with is thinking how powerful it is to be able to share stories and create platforms that we can share our stories. I'm also thinking from what some of the things that I've heard and thought about tonight is that there are a lot of discriminatory narratives out there, and on the one hand, we have our power in our hands to change those things. On the other hand, the onus doesn't fall upon the person being discriminated against to change those narratives. We all have to sort of work together. And also there are powers out there that will control major institutions and narratives like in the media that we have to work from an alternative sort of standpoint.
All right, thanks, Allison. Jerry, go ahead, and then Jason, you're next.
So I thought it was a very interesting conversation in our group. I never really thought about it from the way Anoa and Brennan had talked about in our breakout group. I do believe that we, as a society as a whole, needs to step forward and stand up for what's right, for what has happened in our past, not with just blacks, but with the Indians and the Jews and the Japanese and all the people that we've did wrong. They need some type of repayment, whether it's a monetary or something. Because to me, on the trajectory that we're on, it's just going to keep getting worse unless we start to stand up now and say we've had enough and we've got to go back and fix what we've done wrong.
Cool, thanks, Jerry. J-Rap, and then Judy, you're on deck.
Okay. I took out of this, that it's a lot of people that are, I guess, ignorant or naive to other people's struggle. And it takes a lot to care about something that you're totally unaffected by, and even more to fight to change something that you are directly benefiting from or have benefited from. So I'm not real sure how to reach people on that level, but the fact that we can have this discussion is kind of promising. But at the same time, like, I'm not going to hold my breath. You did.
Always the skeptic.
Hey, all I got is history as a judge, and it's telling a different story.
Cool, thanks, and thanks for being here too. Judy, go ahead, and then Nico, you're on deck.
I think we need, first of all, to make everyone realize that we're all human beings and there is no difference between us, which is the hardest thing to make people understand, but also to open the conversation to those people that are less knowledgeable or less open to information that they really should be paying attention to, because they're so ignorant they have no clue what's going on. At least that's my opinion.
Dang, Judy, you always
just let it out, huh?
Yep. That's cool. Thank you. And
I mean, I'm from such a place where now none of my high school friends can even afford to go there and visit unless their parents live there. So it's come around and bitten a lot of us in the butt in a way that people didn't see. And I'm just sitting here laughing for the last 20 years because I've been able to see it coming down the pike. So anyway, thank you very much, everyone, tonight. I enjoyed all of your questions and answers.
Cool, thanks, Judy. Aniko, you're next, and then Roland, you'll be on deck.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody, for this awesome conversation. It was very enlightening. And I think it was Brandon that said that in the past there was a group of whites that stood with the blacks, and I would hope that we can strive to be those kind of white people that stand with and disable the other racist white people who would continue to go on that path of racism. That's what I want to take away, is to make sure that I speak up anytime I hear anything around me.
Cool, thanks, Aniko. So yeah, Roland, we'll hear from you, and then we'll go to Andrew next.
Yeah, I want to just say that it's a mantra that I live with, is that everything is about relationships. And while I said earlier that I'm mindful of the fact that we could be in an echo chamber on this call, I think that it is important for us to reach out and seek opportunities to engage others in dialogue and to have and to build relationships one by one by one. J-Rap, I know you're not into doing all of that, but I do think it's important for us to every time we get a chance to try, no matter how fleeting it may be, to have a positive relationship with another person, particularly a person perhaps of a different color or a different station in life. And even for that matter, people who are like us, but who may have a different way of thinking than we do, to use that as a chance to build relationships that over time will interweave and hopefully help to create a whole fabric that is really representative of all of us.
Awesome. Thanks, Roland. Andrew, and then we'll hear from Mitchell.
Well, I guess my biggest takeaway is the reparations, and I think I actually agree with that concept. There's been a divide and conquer that's been is beyond all racial and class level at this point. There's just but I'm really focused in on solutions, and I think that I don't know. I'd like to figure out where to begin a serious discussion about actually solving the problem and possibly making reparations directly from bond owners to individuals, as well as the monetary system and fixing its structure, which creates this division of the owners versus the workers. But thanks.
Cool. Thanks, Andrew. And thanks so much for being here. And then I hope that you'll want to continue to be a part of the Global Engagement Network Media Cooperative. And we'll definitely listen and hear more from you. And then when we have our monthly, Gen Monthly on the economy, I think coming back and maybe having a presentation around what that might look like and some of your ideas around that would be very beneficial for us to hear and for everyone else. So thanks. So Mitchell, and then we're going to hear from Brandon.
When I make changes in a large factory, I've got to think of a lot of emotional and psychological factors and getting acceptance, and also what we constantly hit is this inertia, and it's just like any electrical system where you're charging something. Whenever there's a huge change and it crosses the median, you always will have an extreme backlash afterwards, much like we're seeing after the election of President Obama, and now back into the really slapback. And it's all due to something called inrush, and it must be controlled. The rate of change as you approach the median must slow down, or as we discussed with cognitive dissonance, it will cause extreme disruption. And you have to be careful and manage your changes, or you could end up going way back.
Gotcha. Thank you so much, Mitchell. So we'll hear from Brandon, and then Jeremy, you'll be on deck.
I want to, just say I'm honored to be a part of this panel, and I'm blessed to have the opportunity to talk with and also listen to so many great people. And this panel also reaffirms, it pains me because I think we could be so much better as humans, but it also makes me, optimistic because I love people, I love humans, and if we can have open minds, then I think it's an opportunity and a chance for other people, to share the same view and the same, passion that we do for what's right. Because I think at the end of the day, this is what it comes down to: what's right and what's wrong. And it goes beyond just what, civil rights. It goes rights, period. And, how are we treating people? How are we treating our fellow mankind? And I think that, once we start dealing with, how can we be better as people towards each other, then we can tackle all of the problems that has hindered us from being even better as an overall, nation, as an overall populace of this planet, because we have to decide, at the end of the day, what is the right thing? What is the wrong thing? What, as we all know, karma and everything still connects. What you do in the past still resonates in the future. And if we're going to have a future, we have to make sure that we respect and we acknowledge the fact that things of the past could have damn near destroyed this planet, and it's a detriment that's held us back. And in order, if we're going to get on the right track and move forward as just people, we have to make things right. So,
Is that your baby girl?
Yes.
You gotta go get her?
Yep.
Go
So
get
it's
her.
that time for me. All right.
Thank you, sir.
Hey, no
Thanks,
problem.
Brandon.
I love all y'all, and just great talking to everybody. I'm blessed to meet everybody.
Yes, thank you.
Cool. Yeah, great. Thanks again, Brandon. So let's hear from Jeremy, and then Sean, you'll go ahead and close it out with your comments, and then, yep.
So, what an inspiring conversation. I began my morning today with a lady on a panel at our church asking the question of all of us, why did we think she gave a damn about Black History Month since she was clearly a white person? That was the beginning of my day. And we've now come full circle to me really just being very inspired by her stories that she told, and looking now in my head on the alignment of the different perspectives that we got from our 4 panelists this evening. And John and I are business partners, and we're excited to also be part of the Global Engagement Network and to see all the work that's happening there. And a conversation like this one really starts to change the dynamic. I think the thing I'm taking away from tonight is that there are so many conversations to still have, that we're just starting. My good friend Roland, who never, by the way, ceases to amaze me more and more every time, who ceases to amaze me, let me say that again, who amazes me more and more every time that I get an opportunity to talk about these issues with him, talks about implicit bias. And even as somebody who doesn't see the differences in skin color, I've recently challenged myself more to look more at my own implicit bias that I make based on the way someone talks or the way that someone acts. So mine's not even a race thing. It's just a bias that I carry. And the reason that I bring this up is because Roland is going to be leading a more in-depth conversation on April 4th on Tuesday. You can find information about that. Again, that's on April 4th on a Tuesday. And I believe you can go to isodc.org, which is his organization, and find more information about that. If not, we'll make sure that that also gets out on the S&G Endeavors, and hopefully Jen will blast that on their pages as well. My other reflection, like I said, though, is that this is the beginning of a conversation. And I think, to what somebody said earlier, yep, it's a little uncomfortable sometimes as a white person. So if you're a white person like me and you feel a little uncomfortable, they did a great job tonight. And I think that Mitchell has really good points with how you create change. I actually am one, Mitchell, that I like to see the change create some disruption a little bit too. So I do think it's a balance, and I think that we only achieve that balance by continuing to have the uncomfortable conversation. So that's my challenge to everybody as Sean goes into bringing us to a close. My challenge is find a way in the next week to continue having the uncomfortable part of the conversation with somebody that you haven't had it with yet, and just see what it's like. And I can tell you from personal experience, it's really uncomfortable the first time. Second time, not so bad. The third time, not so bad. and it gets better and better. And before you know it, you're in a conversation like this saying, man, I wish we had 3 more hours and we could keep talking about this and keep coming up with solutions. Sorry for the long-windedness, but I wasn't really given a time frame.
Jeremy, you gave the time frame. It was 45 seconds to a minute.
Yeah, sorry, man. I was a participant.
Well, I mean, you can't say
I stopped facilitating.
You can't say you weren't given a time frame, though. No, so everyone, thank you. I'm going to have Sean close it out, but I wanted to chime in because I hadn't yet. But thank you. I learned so much. I'm definitely inspired to continue to talk about racism and to talk about these difficult issues, and actually to talk about that this is all human rights, and we're all part of the cutting edge on what's the next conversations that we need to have in order to make a difference, and that includes everyone on here. And one easy way for me is to share this video and talk with folks just that I know and that I network with about the group and about who we had on and about the conversations that we had. So thanks everyone for being here. And Sean, I'll let you kind of close us out.
Sure. Well, yes. Thank you again for everyone for speaking and everyone of our panelists for coming and sharing their insight. It was a great second going for Gen Monthly. Of course, next month we'll be doing on March 26th, we're doing another Gen Monthly on water protectors and climate change. So make sure to look forward to that. And we'll be sending out links for that sort of thing. Again, thank you everyone for joining us. It was a great time. You can always like us and subscribe to our YouTube channel, of course. And we now have our site back up at globalengagementnetwork.com. So you can always check out what we're doing there. And thanks again for everyone joining us, and have a good rest of the night.
Great. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.